This video is brought to you by Ground News. Trump has never been much of a multilateralist. He's always talking about America first, he suspects America's allies of free riding, and he doesn't really do diplomatic pleasantries. Nonetheless, even by his standards, his first few days in office have been confrontational. He said he wants to annex a whole load of territory, withdraw from the UN's World Health Organization, and threaten trade wars against America's longest-standing allies, including Taiwan apparently. So in this video, we're going to look at all the various geopolitical spats Trump is currently in, how they might play out, and whether it'll ultimately isolate the US. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's start by looking at all Trump's recent spats. Most obviously there's Denmark and Greenland, who've been put out by Trump's repeated insistence that he wants to buy or seize the world's largest island. This also hasn't gone down well with the rest of the EU, with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz reaffirming the inviolability of borders, and the French Foreign Minister even announcing that France was considering deploying troops to the island. Then there's Canada, which also doesn't like Trump's idea of incorporating it into the US or the prospect of a trade war. Trump's comments have gone down so badly that even Canadian Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, Trudeau's likely successor as Prime Minister and someone who was previously seen as relatively close to Trump, has come out swinging, telling Trump, quote, "Canada will never be the 51st state," and insisting that he would retaliate hard if Trump imposed tariffs. Finally, there's Panama, which is in a similar situation given Trump's stated ambition to retake the Panama Canal. And Mexico, which, on top of massive tariffs, is now also facing the threat of unauthorized military action, which looks increasingly likely given Trump signed an executive order designating the cartels as terrorist organizations, and the Pentagon has now deployed 1,500 active duty troops to the border. Donald Trump Jr. even suggested on X a couple of days ago that the president could issue what are known as letters of marque and reprisal, which would basically offer private actors, like private security firms, money to go after the cartels. Another possible point of tension in the US-Mexico relationship is Trump's hardline immigration policy, which will entail deporting millions of undocumented migrants back to their countries of origin. This has already put a strain on America's relationship with its South and Central American neighbours. A few weeks ago, for instance, Honduras threatened to close the US military base in the country if Trump followed through on his deportation plan. And there was a brief deportation-related standoff between Trump and Colombian President Gustavo Petro earlier this week, which apparently ended when Trump threatened to tariff the country. Trump's tariff threats have also strained relations with its longtime allies like the EU, who are already put out by his demand that NATO members spend 5% of GDP on defence, and Elon Musk's controversial interventions, but also Taiwan. For context, earlier this week, Trump announced that he was planning to put a 25%, 50%, or maybe 100% tariff on semiconductors coming into the US, and withdraw all subsidies for new semiconductor manufacturing plants, which were introduced under Biden's CHIPS Act. In practice, this will mainly affect Taiwan and the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. Not only does TSMC produce the vast majority of the world's chips in Taiwan, but it also benefits from generous CHIPS Act subsidies, which are funding its new factories in the US. You get the idea. In just the first week or so, Trump has irked quite a few world leaders. Now, to be fair, he's also had some diplomatic wins. It looks like he negotiated a ceasefire in Gaza, which presumably went down well with America's Arab neighbours like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and he's been surprisingly strong in his support for Ukraine, blaming Putin for refusing peace talks and threatening to put further pressure on the Russian economy. It's also worth saying that polling suggests that Trump is remarkably popular in the so-called Global South. ECFR polling found that pluralities of people in India, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, and even Ukraine thought Trump's election would be good for their country, presumably in part because these countries appreciate Trump's peace-focused foreign policy and his frankness. To at least some people in the Global South, America has always been a geopolitical bully, and at least Trump's honest about it. However, even here, whatever goodwill he might have garnered is being quickly undermined. In Gaza, Trump is now pushing to displace Palestinians into Egypt or Jordan. an idea neither the Palestinians nor the Arab states are keen on. And just days after having a go at Putin for stymieing peace talks, Trump announced a freeze on all foreign aid to Ukraine. Similarly, that polling we just mentioned was done back in November. Trump's peacemaker credentials have since been somewhat undermined by his neo-imperialist overtures to Canada, Greenland and Panama, and it's hard to imagine Saudis, for instance, still being so pro-Trump, given his plan to evict Gaza, his push for lower oil prices, and his request that Saudi Arabia invest $1 trillion into the US. Now, of course, it's too early to say anything definitive. And if it turns out Trump's bark is worse than his bite, America's network of alliances might hold, as it did in his first term. But there are a few reasons to think that Trump's second term will be more destabilising. But for starters, one of the big reasons Trump's bark was worse than his bite in his first term was that his policies were blunted by what he'd call the swamp. This is no longer true. Trump and his MAGA advisors are clearly far better prepared for their second attempt at governing, and his control of the courts and Congress gives him even more room for manoeuvre. On top of that, in 2016, America's allies thought Trump was an anomaly. He won the Republican primary against the odds, lost the popular vote, and lost the next presidential election, and so were willing to wait him out. The fact that he's won again, plus the magnitude of his victory, and the fact that Joe Biden actually continued with lots of Trump's policies, means America's allies now think this could be the new normal, at least for Republicans, which will encourage them to pivot away from the US. Of course, Trump would probably say that this is no bad thing. As he sees it, America's current alliances just aren't worth it. With Europe, for instance, America subsidises its security via NATO and fuels its economy via its trade deficit. Nonetheless, even if Trump's right and an America unburdened by obligations to allies really is a stronger America, this would still represent a pretty dramatic reshaping of the world order. This story is only growing though, with Trump's recent claim that America will take Greenland being covered by more than 106 outlets, with 31% of those sources leaning left and 40% of them leaning right. If you compare the headlines, you'll start to see some interesting framing emerge. With outlets on the left more likely to describe Trump's attempts to take Greenland as worrying or greedy, while those on the right tend to focus on how important this is to Trump and how serious he is. This is all possible thanks to our sponsor, Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. They pull in stories from all over the world and organise them by story, and every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. One of my favourite features is their blind spot feed, which shows you stories underreported by one side of the political spectrum or the other. For instance, if you lean right, you might have missed this story about a GOP lawmaker who suggested that school children should have to work in order to earn free lunches, a story that was reported on by major left-leaning outlets, but no one on the right. Now, as an impartial news outlet, we're passionate about informing our viewers about bias and helping them to understand how it affects the media they consume. Ground News is very effective at this, showing you exactly how each side of the political divide covers each story you see online. And best of all, we're currently offering viewers 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to all of their amazing features like their blind spot feed. So go to ground.news/TLDR, click the QR code here on screen, or use the link in the description to subscribe today.